I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
The chandeliers of the Imperial Opera House glittered like 1,000 captive stars, scattering their brilliance across polished marble and gowns of silk and satin. Vienna, at her most opulent, had gathered for the annual Swan Lake Ball, an affair so steeped in tradition that attendance itself was considered a badge of nobility. The music of Tchaikovsky soared, the strings swelling in harmony with the laughter, and the clink of champagne, flutes. Masks, white, silver, and gold, added a note of mystery, blurring the lines between aristocrat and adventurer, patron and performer. It was just past midnight when the incident occurred. A waltz had begun, the sweep of the orchestra carrying the couples across the floor like drifting swans. Then came a sudden disturbance near the grand staircase. A woman's gasp, sharp as a violin string, snapped under pressure, cut through the music. Heads turned. The dancers faltered. Upon the marble steps lay the body of Countess Helena Markova, her swan feather mask askew, her skin pale as ivory under the gaslight. Her gown, of pearl-white satin, seemed unstained until one saw the dark bloom spreading beneath the bodice, crimson against snow. A jeweled dagger protruded, grotesquely out of place amid the refinement. The orchestra faltered, silence cascading through the ballroom until the last note died unfinished. Whispers swelled like a rising storm. The Countess had been admired, envied, and whispered about in equal measure. Her fortune, recently inherited, was the subject of much speculation. Her liaisons, though spoken of discreetly, were known to all who circulated in the gilded salons of Europe. And now, in the very heart of Vienna's high society, she lay dead at the foot of the staircase, her lifeless eyes gazing upward as though frozen in some private revelation. The doors were closed swiftly. No guest would be permitted to leave until the authorities arrived. But within those gilt-trimmed walls lingered more than fear. There was calculation. For among the glittering crowd were friends, rivals, and perhaps one enemy who had struck with elegance and precision. The murder at the Swan Lake Ball would ripple outward, across reputations, fortunes, and families. And somewhere within the assembled company stood the one who knew more than they revealed. The stage was set. The curtain of gaiety torn, the affair had begun. The hush that followed the orchestra's collapse thinned into whispers as guests drew back from the staircase, forming a careful ring around the Countess. The maitre d' raised his hand. The terrace doors were locked with a decisive click. "Fetch a physician," an old gentleman barked. No one moved until a man in dove-gray tails crouched by the body without touching it. "Life has departed," he said. "A narrow blade, driven upward, practiced." A woman in a black domino gave a cry like crystal struck by a fingernail. The old gentleman, Baron von Haller, host of the ball, set a hand on her shoulder. "Courage, Countess Callista." A figure appeared at the foot of the stairs with military neatness. "Inspector Gruber, Vienna Polizei." No one leaves. Servants remain at their posts. I require the guest list, the seating plan, and who stood where when the waltz began. The orchestra laid their instruments aside. Dr. Weiss looked up. "You will have the police surgeon, Inspector." Gruber's gaze took in the dagger, the feather fixed to the marble by a bead of blood, the glittering, embarrassed crowd. "Who last spoke with the Countess?" "I did," said a tall man whose white mask sat pushed back like a second, astonished face. "Alexei Petrov, attaché to the Russian embassy. She asked whether I'd seen Mr. Emil Hartmann." "The director of Markova Enterprises." "The same," Petrov said. At the name, a slim woman in mauve stepped forward. "I am Ada Hartmann. My husband is unwell and absent." "Where is he unwell?" Gruber's politeness had edges. "At home. Send a physician to harry him if stethoscopes are the fashion." A murmur fluttered and died. Countess Callista lifted her chin. "Ada, have a care. Helena, she caught her breath. Helena lies there. I am aware, Ada said, and for an instant steel showed under silk. Baron von Haller spoke in his ambassador's voice. Inspector, the Countess dined at my table. You shall have every assistance. I shame only the guilty, Gruber replied. Dr. Weiss, the weapon? It is fashionable, the doctor said. A jeweled stiletto, sold in velvet boxes to men who mistake ornament for taste. Does anyone own a similar toy? Gruber asked. My wife has one, said a banker, touching a pearl stud that throbbed with his pulse. For letters? I carry such a cutter, Petrov added. For cigars. I had one, murmured Countess Calista. A gift. It is lost. Lost tonight? I cannot say when. I dance. I am careless. The maitre d' returned with papers pinched between careful fingers. Inspector, the guest list, and there was a note delivered for the Countess before midnight. Messenger to the stage door. I placed it with her fan on the landing where she said she would read it between dances. Gruber's head lifted. And now, it is no longer there. Who saw it last? A young ballerina spoke, voice soft as falling ash. I did. She stood near the newel post. She asked me to take the message to Mr. Hartmann, or, failing him, to Mrs. Hartmann. She said it was time for the truth. Ada Hartmann regarded the girl without blinking. You did not bring me any message. I could not find you, the ballerina whispered. When I returned, the Countess was gone from the landing. Then someone else fetched the truth, Gruber said. He studied the little pauses between expressions. We begin with statements. After that, we recreate the waltz. The waltz? The banker repeated. Yes, said Gruber. One learns much from the partners people choose twice. Dr. Weiss rose. No defensive wounds. She knew the whisper that accompanied the blade. Then the whisper must be found, Baron von Haller said. The stage manager, a sharp little man, emerged from the wings. If the inspector is to parade his suspects, the lighting must not lie. Leave the moon to the snow, Gruber said. Bring up the house. Keep the terrace locked. Countess Calista, Gruber said, your last partner. Mr. Petrov. And before that, the Baron. Vienna is famous for exchanging partners, Petrov observed. Indeed, Gruber said, and for exchanging letters. Mrs. Hartmann, if a note sought you, what truth might it carry? Ada's hands stayed still on her clutch. If any truth travels by messenger, Inspector, it concerns money. Helena had lately become devout about sums. Sums? The Baron asked. Dividends, valuations, mineral rights, Ada said. The dullest truths are sometimes the most dangerous. Gruber nodded, a small stone rolling into place. We shall see. Positions, please. We resume the waltz from the first bar after midnight. I will walk in your shadow. Snow rattled the panes, patient as an audience. Partners were chosen again with more care and less gaiety. The empty place at the head of the staircase watched them all, and the fallen feather did not stir. Somewhere, folded into a pocket or glove, a paper whispered of truth. The music began, eyes watched, and secrets held fast. The orchestra resumed with careful precision, though each note seemed to quiver under the tension that pressed upon the gilded hall. The waltz, once a symbol of gaiety, had become a reenactment, every turn and glide an echo of an hour now drenched in blood. Inspector Gruber moved among the dancers like a shadow, his gaze sharp, his questions sharper still. Yet beneath the swirl of gowns and the flicker of candlelight, unease clung to every guest. They danced, yes, but it was no longer for pleasure. It was compulsion, a reconstruction ordered by authority. Each man and woman felt the weight of the dead countess's stare upon them, as though she hovered above, her swan feather mask transformed into a silent accusation. Countess Calista, ever dramatic even in tragedy, swayed in the arms of Alexei Petrov, her dark eyes shimmering with something that hovered between sorrow and defiance. Gruber circled them, listening as they exchanged stilted words, his ears catching fragments that might have meant nothing, or everything. He saw how Petrov's hand lingered at her back, longer than necessary, how her breath shortened when he spoke low. Lovers, perhaps, or conspirators. He filed the observation away with the precision of a clerk entering numbers in a ledger. At the far side of the ballroom, Ada Hartmann stood tall, refusing to be cowed by the spectacle. She danced with Baron von Halle, their movements stately, almost mechanical. The Baron, with his polished courtesy, attempted to guide her through the steps, but her eyes never left Gruber. The inspector noticed she did not hide her scrutiny. If the lost note had indeed been meant for her, she carried its absence with remarkable composure. Yet composure, Gruber knew, was as much armor as truth. The ballerina, young and timid, stumbled in her partner's arms, drawing an irritated murmur from those nearby. Her face was pale, as though she bore the weight of guilt too heavy for her fragile frame. Gruber studied her with a calculating eye. A messenger who had lost her message, a dancer who had lost her rhythm. There were metaphors enough to trouble a poet, but the inspector had little time for poetry. He noted instead how she avoided Ada's gaze, how she bit her lip when Petrov's name was spoken, how her steps faltered when mention of Helena Markova stirred the air like smoke from a candle. The music ended. Silence rushed in, thick and expectant. Gruber allowed it to hold for a moment before speaking. "I thank you. Now I understand better how the evening unfolded. It tells me much, though you imagine it tells me nothing. A glance, a step, a hesitation, each is an answer to a question I have not yet spoken." He turned deliberately, his coat brushing the marble. "But answers without context are dust. I require the context." Baron von Halle gestured toward the antechamber adjoining the ballroom. "Inspector, perhaps the guests should be permitted to rest. This exercise—" "No," Gruber interrupted, his tone clipped. "The chamber will serve instead for interviews. One by one each of you will speak. Those who tire must learn patience. Patience is an honest man's comfort." He looked directly at Petrov. "You first." Petrov inclined his head, the faintest smile curling at his lips. "An honor," he said smoothly, and followed the inspector into the antechamber. The heavy door closed behind them with a sound that seemed to shiver through the remaining guests. Murmurs rose instantly, speculation spinning like a wheel set loose. Ada Hartmann folded her arms, her expression unreadable, while Countess Calista fanned herself, though the air was cool. The ballerina sat upon a chair, hands clasped, eyes downcast, as though the floorboards might offer her absolution. Within the chamber, Gruber leaned against the mantel and fixed Petrov with his steady gaze. "You were the last to speak with the Countess. What passed between you?" Petrov's shrug was elegant, almost theatrical. "She asked after Hartmann. She wished to see him, insisted upon it. She was restless, nervous. I advised her to wait, but Helena was never patient. Always the dramatist." "And the note?" "I saw no note." Petrov's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "If I had, Inspector, I might have known what truth so troubled her. You dance with Countess Calista. You linger in your embrace. You are intimate." Petrov laughed softly. "Vienna is intimate, Inspector. A dance is a dance, nothing more." "Perhaps," Gruber said, though his eyes did not waver. "Or perhaps much more. You are Russian. The Countess held assets in mineral rights. Convenient acquaintanceship, no?" Petrov's smile did not falter. "You think us all schemers. It flatters me. But Helena and I were friends, nothing more. Friends share confidences, yes, but not daggers." Gruber considered him in silence, measuring the gaps between his words. Then he nodded to the constable by the door. "Send in Ada Hartmann." Petrov bowed slightly and swept from the room, his composure unbroken, his mask of civility polished to a mirror. Ada entered in his place, her posture rigid, her chin tilted at an angle that dared the inspector to challenge her. She seated herself without invitation and folded her hands neatly upon her lap. "You dislike me already," she said. "Let us not waste time with politeness." Gruber arched an eyebrow. "I dislike no one. It clouds the eye. But truth, Madame Hartmann. Truth I require." "Then ask directly." "The note was intended for you. What truth would it have spoken?" "If I knew," Ada said coolly, "perhaps Helena would still be alive. She was a woman of impulses. Her truths shifted with the hour." "You had quarrel with her." "A difference. Business. She believed herself cleverer than my husband in matters of finance. She was wrong. But quarrel? No. Helena thrived on envy, not hatred. Hatred requires constancy." "And yet she is dead," Gruber murmured. "Someone's constancy proved fatal." Ada's expression did not soften. "Then find him or her. It will not be me." She rose before he dismissed her, her composure as firm as marble. The door closed once more, leaving Gruber alone with the echo of her words. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, eyes narrowing. Outside in the ballroom, the whispers swelled. The guests, restless and afraid, knew that the inspector hunted among them. Yet what they did not know, what none of them could yet suspect, was that a small, dapper Belgian with meticulous moustaches had already arrived in Vienna that very evening, summoned by a letter of his own. He had not yet shown his face among the glittering crowd, but soon Hercule Poirot would step into the light of the chandeliers and the dance of truth would begin in earnest. The ballroom, restless and murmuring, seemed to pulse with unease as Ada Hartmann swept back into its golden light. Her expression was as unyielding as a marble statue, though her eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of something unspoken. Fear or calculation, it was difficult to tell. Inspector Gruber remained behind in the antechamber, his methodical questioning continuing with the precision of a surgeon's blade. But it was clear to all present that the investigation had barely begun. Guests shifted uncomfortably, sipping champagne they no longer tasted, while the orchestra played muted chords to soften the oppressive silence. Yet no melody could disguise the fact that the Countess still lay at the foot of the staircase, a silent centerpiece around which suspicion revolved. The next to be summoned was Countess Calista. She rose with languid grace, her fan fluttering before her lips like the wing of some dark bird. Murmurs followed her as she entered the chamber, and the door closed firmly behind her. The guests leaned closer together, their whispers weaving a tapestry of rumor and dread. Every one of them understood that each person called forth might return diminished, their dignity pierced by Gruber's relentless inquiry. But before Calista could emerge, another arrival drew every eye to the entrance of the ballroom. A small figure, impeccably dressed, stepped inside with the confidence of one who was entirely at ease, even in the presence of death. His black evening coat was pristine, his patent leather shoes gleamed, and above his starched collar shone the most carefully waxed mustaches in all of Europe. Hercule Poirot had arrived. He paused a moment, taking in the glittering yet uneasy company, the overturned patterns of gaiety, the dark stain marring the marble steps. His keen eyes missed nothing. The feathers scattered near the body, the tremor in the young ballerina's hands, the way Ada Hartmann clasped her clutch so tightly it threatened to crush the silk. Poirot's expression was grave, but there was also the faintest suggestion of disapproval, as though chaos itself offended him. With delicate precision, he adjusted his cuffs and advanced into the room. The Baron hurried to greet him. "Monsieur Poirot, you honor us in the darkest of hours. I confess I did not expect you this evening." Poirot inclined his head. "Baron, I received a letter, unsigned, urging me to attend the Swan Lake Ball. It spoke of danger, of a crime that would be attempted beneath these very chandeliers." Such letters, you understand, I cannot ignore. And now, ah, mon Dieu, the prophecy is fulfilled. Gasps rippled through the company. Some pressed closer, eager for his presence, while others shrank back as if a light had been cast upon their hidden shadows. Poirot bent slightly over the Countess's body, careful not to disturb even a thread of fabric. His eyes studied the jeweled dagger, the position of her hands, the tilt of her head. For several moments he was silent, and in that silence the orchestra faltered again, as if even the musicians leaned forward to hear. Finally, Poirot straightened. The police, they are diligent, yes, but they look with the eyes of the body. I, Hercule Poirot, I look with the eyes of the mind. What is here, mesdames et messieurs, is not merely murder, it is theatre. And in the theatre, one must always ask, who wrote the play and who performs upon the stage? Inspector Gruber re-entered from the antechamber just then, his expression tightening at the sight of the famous Belgian. Monsieur Poirot, I was not informed of your commission in this matter. Poirot smiled faintly, tilting his head. Nor was I, Inspector. I am like you, a servant of truth. If it pleases you, we may work together. If it displeases you, then perhaps we shall work side by side. But either way, the murderer will not escape. The inspector hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Very well, but here in Vienna, the case belongs to the Polizei. Naturellement, Poirot said smoothly. And yet, permit me to observe, to speak, to listen. It is my little hobby, Inspector. You will find, perhaps, that it yields results. Gruber studied him a moment longer, then gestured for the next witness. Countess Calista emerged from the chamber, her face pale, her hands trembling. She avoided the sight of Poirot, though he watched her keenly, his mustaches twitching as if they scented a contradiction. He approached her with a courtly bow. Madame, forgive me, but I must trouble you with a question. When you danced with Monsieur Petroff, what words did you exchange? She faltered, her fan slipping slightly. Only pleasantries, Monsieur Poirot. Ah, but pleasantries, they can be most revealing. One says, how is your health? And yet one means, what is your secret? Think carefully. Her lips trembled and she turned away without answering. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Very well. You will tell me when the time is right. As she retreated, Poirot stepped toward the young ballerina, who still sat with eyes lowered, wringing her hands. He crouched beside her with surprising gentleness. Mademoiselle, you delivered the note to the Countess, did you not? A note which spoke of truth? Her eyes darted upward, startled. How did you know? Poirot smiled kindly. The eyes, they betray what the lips conceal. You looked at Madame Hartmann with fear, not with innocence. You are young and you tremble, but you are not guilty. Tell me, what did you see when you returned to the landing? Her voice dropped to a whisper. I saw a man. He was leaving quickly, as if he wished not to be noticed. I thought it was Mr. Petroff, but I cannot be certain. Poirot's gaze flicked toward the Russian attaché, who was watching from across the room with cool detachment. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most brave. The guests stirred, unsettled by the exchange. Gruber scowled, clearly irritated that Poirot had plucked information he himself had not yet drawn forth. Yet the Belgian detective only smoothed his mustache and spoke softly, almost to himself. A letter lost, a truth concealed, a woman dead. And now, ah yes, an actor upon the stage who plays his role too perfectly. We shall see. The dance of lies has begun, but every dance must one day end. He rose, his eyes moving from face to face, watching every flicker of expression. Somewhere among them was the one who had plunged the jeweled dagger into Helena Markova's heart. Somewhere among them was the hand that had turned music into murder. And Poirot, with the patience of a clockmaker and the precision of a surgeon, would uncover it, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the naked truth. The murmurs that rippled across the gilded hall seemed to hush of their own accord as Poirot's quiet declaration lingered in the air. Guests shifted uneasily, each trying to measure how much the Belgian detective might already know. Inspector Gruber stood taut, his jaw set, though even he could not disguise a flicker of curiosity at the younger ballerina's whispered revelation. She sat with her head bowed, as if ashamed for having spoken at all, yet the detail, that fleeting glimpse of a man slipping from the landing, had landed like a pebble cast into still water, sending circles outward that touched every corner of the room. Poirot did not press further at once. Instead, he allowed silence to weigh heavily, a silence in which thoughts grew loud and consciences restless. He folded his hands behind his back and began to walk slowly along the ring of guests, pausing to observe each in turn. His gaze lingered on Petrov, who met it with an almost insolent calm, then upon Ada Hartmann, whose composure was icy but brittle at the edges. Countess Calista shifted nervously beneath his scrutiny, her fan fluttering more rapidly than before, while the Baron looked on with a face carefully arranged into diplomatic neutrality. Every glance was a clue, every nervous tick an answer waiting to be interpreted. "Inspector," Poirot said at last, his tone mild but unmistakably firm, "may I suggest we examine not only the persons, but also the path of the letter itself? It is like a coin, this note. It has passed from one hand to another, perhaps even more than we yet know. Whoever holds it now holds also the key to motive." Gruber's brow furrowed, but he nodded curtly. "Very well. You believe someone here still carries it?" Poirot tapped his temple lightly. "Or has disposed of it clumsily. Such things they cannot vanish into the ether. If one looks with the little grey cells, one sees the shape of its journey. From messenger to countess, from countess to whom? That is what we must establish." He turned with sudden precision toward Ada. "Madame, you say you never received this note. And yet, had you received it, what would you have done?" Ada's gaze was steady. "I would have read it naturally. And if its contents were of no consequence, I would have discarded it. And if its contents were dangerous, I would have spoken with my husband. He is the one whose name it invoked." Poirot inclined his head slightly, noting the way her hands tightened around her clutch. "And yet your husband is absent." "He is ill," she answered swiftly, almost too swiftly. "Too ill for such festivities." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Illness, it is inconvenient, but murder, it is more so." The remark drew a faint ripple of amusement from some in the room, but Ada did not flinch. Instead, she raised her chin higher, as though daring Poirot to press harder. He merely offered her a small bow, then shifted his attention once more to Petrov. "Monsieur, you are said to have been seen leaving the landing where the Countess last stood alive. You are tall, broad of shoulder. It is easy to mistake such a figure in shadow. But tell me, where were you precisely when the fatal moment occurred?" Petrov smiled faintly, his teeth glinting under the chandelier light. "I was searching for a servant to fetch me a glass of water. The air grew thick and I desired refreshment, that is all." "A curious errand for a man accustomed to gala evenings," Poirot murmured. "The servants, they circulate continually, and yet you chose the landing away from the crowd." "It was cooler there," Petrov replied smoothly. "I sought air more than water, perhaps. Must a man justify his every breath?" Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Sometimes, yes, especially when another breath has been stilled forever." Gruber interjected brusquely, perhaps irritated at being eclipsed. "We will confirm your movements, Mr. Petrov. Until then, remain at hand." His gaze swept across the assembly. "None of you will depart until I am satisfied." Poirot's attention, however, had shifted toward the staircase itself. With delicate steps, he approached the marble where the Countess had fallen. He bent down, his eyes sharp, noting the precise angle of the body, the way her arm had fallen outward, the scattering of feathers that had drifted from her mask. Something drew his eye nearer. The faintest smear upon the polished banister, nearly invisible unless the light caught it. He straightened with a small exclamation. "Inspector, regard this." Gruber joined him, frowning. "A stain?" "Oui. A smear of powder, most likely from a woman's glove. But note the position, high upon the rail, above where the Countess fell. She was not clutching at life as she descended. No, she was gripped, restrained perhaps, and the glove left its mark." Poirot's voice carried just enough for the gathered guests to hear. This was not merely a sudden plunge. There was struggle, however brief, upon these very stairs. The guests gasped softly. Countess Callista's fan snapped shut with a sharp crack. Ada's lips pressed into a thin line. Petrov's expression remained carefully neutral, but his fingers twitched against his cuff. The ballerina shrank further into her chair, whispering a prayer beneath her breath. Poirot stood tall, adjusting his tie. "We move closer, mes amis. Already the shadows grow less friendly. The truth, it pushes forward, even as some of you would push it back." Gruber cleared his throat, reclaiming authority. "This observation will be recorded. Constables, note it carefully. We continue with statements. No one leaves, and no one forgets that we now seek not merely a missing letter, but also a hand that pressed upon the Countess in her final moments." Poirot's eyes, sharp as polished glass, swept the company once more. He said nothing further, but his silence was heavier than words. Each guest felt it like a weight upon their shoulders, pressing down until even the rustle of silk seemed loud. Though the chandelier still shone, the brilliance of the ballroom could not disguise the fact that within its walls lurked deceit, ambition, and fear. The dance of lies was far from over, and Poirot, with his patience and precision, would see every step uncovered. The guests could feel the shift in the room as if the very air had thickened with the inspector's declaration and Poirot's discovery upon the staircase. The realization that the Countess had not simply fallen or been struck unawares, but had been held, restrained even for a moment, unsettled the assembly far more than the jeweled dagger alone. It was one thing to imagine a swift, almost impersonal strike amid the noise of the ball. It was another to know that, in her final breath, Helena Markova had looked into the face of her murderer. Poirot did not allow the silence to stretch too long. With a delicate gesture, he beckoned toward the young ballerina again, his voice gentler than before. "Mademoiselle, forgive me, but I must ask. When you glimpsed the figure leaving the landing, you hesitated to speak with certainty. Yet now we know the Countess was not alone in her last moment. Close your eyes. Recall not the face, perhaps, but the impression. Was it height? Was it gait? A detail, however small, may prove of great importance." The ballerina's lips trembled, and her lashes fluttered against pale cheeks as she obeyed. Her voice came barely above a whisper. He moved quickly, but not in panic, with purpose. His shoulders. Broad, yes, and there was a glint, perhaps a cufflink or a ring. She shook her head suddenly. "I am not sure." Poirot laid a hand lightly upon hers. "No, you are brave, mademoiselle. Already you give us more than before. Broad shoulders, a glint. It is enough to narrow the circle, oui?" He turned back to the room with a sudden sharpness. His eyes lingered upon Petrov first, broad of frame, dressed with the meticulous excess of a diplomat who relished jewels at his cuffs. Then his gaze slid, almost lazily, to Baron von Haller, whose own shoulders carried the authority of a man accustomed to command. The guests followed Poirot's eyes, their own whispers growing more fevered. Gruber snapped his fingers, silencing the murmurs. "We will not indulge in theatre, Monsieur Poirot. Witness impressions are not proof." "Perhaps not proof," Poirot said smoothly. "But they are threads, and I am very, fond of weaving threads. He inclined his head to the inspector in acknowledgement, as though he yielded the stage, though his eyes continued to weigh the suspects like a jeweler judging flawed diamonds. At Gruber's signal, Countess Calista was summoned again for further questions. She swept forward, her composure fraying at the edges, now that the conversation of restraint upon the staircase had entered the light. Her fan, which had once fluttered with practiced elegance, now snapped open and closed with unconscious agitation. "Madame," Gruber began sternly, "you were near the Countess before she was killed. Did you see her speak with anyone other than Petrov?" Calista hesitated. The pause was longer than necessary. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, though he said nothing. I recall she was unsettled," Calista admitted at last. "She spoke of a letter. Yes, the same you all mention. She seemed desperate that it reached Mrs. Hartman. She said—" The fan stilled for an instant. "She said that if she could not deliver it, she would reveal its contents aloud before midnight." The effect of this revelation struck the room like a sudden clap of thunder. Ada Hartman's face tightened, her hands gripping her clutch with such force that her knuckles whitened. Petrov's gaze flickered sharply toward her before resuming its mask of indifference. The Baron cleared his throat as though to cover a cough, but his eyes, too, had shifted uneasily toward Ada. Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but penetrating. "And did she say what truth this letter contained?" Calista shook her head, her expression half shame, half fear. "No, only that it was dangerous, and that once spoken, it could never be unsaid." Poirot allowed himself a small, thoughtful nod. Then it was not merely a quarrel over money. No, it was something more, something that could not be undone. The orchestra had fallen entirely silent now, their instruments resting forgotten. Every ear strained to catch the smallest word, for in that grand hall the investigation had become its own performance. Poirot's precise gestures, Gruber's blunt authority, the suspect's trembling defenses, it was a drama more compelling than any waltz. Inspector Gruber barked an order for the servants to search the antechambers, cloakrooms, and servants' passages for the missing letter. Poirot watched them disperse with a faint smile, as though he already knew the letter would not be found so easily. He turned once again toward Ada. "Madame Hartman," Poirot said with quiet courtesy, "you hear now that the Countess intended to speak aloud what she carried. This must concern you, no?" Ada's chin lifted defiantly. "It concerns me only because her imagination was wild. Helena enjoyed creating dramas where none existed. Perhaps she wished to embarrass me publicly. Perhaps she was jealous of my position. She was a woman of extravagances." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "extravagances do not always end with blood upon the marble. For that, there must be something more substantial." Ada's lips pressed together and she said no more. The silence that followed her refusal was eloquent. Poirot did not press further. Instead, he turned once again to the staircase, his eyes narrowing as though he sought not the grandeur of the chandeliers, but some invisible pattern hidden in shadow. At that moment, one of the constables returned hurriedly, bearing a folded scrap of paper. "Inspector, we found this in the cloakroom, crumpled behind a velvet curtain." Gruber seized it, his eyes scanning quickly, his brow furrowed, then smoothed into stern neutrality. "It is torn. Only fragments remain." He held it up for all to see. A few words were legible. "Rights. Betrayal. Emile. Must know. Before they—" The rest was jagged, lost. A collective shiver passed through the company. Emile Hartman's name stood out starkly, like a flare in the dark. Poirot stepped forward, studying the fragment without touching it. "Ah, a thread, Inspector. A thread indeed. It tells us that the husband, though absent, stands at the heart of this affair. And yet," his eyes swept the guests once more, "murder was not committed to protect Emile alone. No, it was committed because the truth threatened someone in this room, Someone feared the Countess would speak before midnight. His gaze rested briefly on Ada, then upon Petrov, then upon the Baron. Each shifted uneasily beneath the weight of his attention. Poirot straightened, adjusting his cuffs once more. The dance continues, but the rhythm changes. Soon we shall hear the discordant note that betrays the dancer who leads us falsely. And then, mes amis, we shall know who guided the Countess to her death. The chandeliers glittered, cold and brilliant, as though mocking the pale faces below. Every guest knew now that the walls of the ballroom had closed in. There was no escape until the hidden hand was revealed. The torn fragment of the letter lay upon the inspector's table like a wounded thing, its jagged edges mocking all who stared at it. The words, rights, betrayal, Emile, must know. Before they seemed to hang in the air heavier than the perfume clinging to the velvet curtains. No one dared speak at first, for each syllable was a loaded pistol waiting to fire in the wrong direction. Poirot alone moved, pacing in his neat, measured steps, his fingertips pressed together as if the very air between them contained the clue others could not see. Betrayal, he said softly, tasting the word as though it were bitter. A powerful word, mes amis. It is not used for the losing of a trinket or for a quarrel over champagne. It is a word for treachery, for wounds that cut the soul. His eyes lingered on Ada Hartmann, whose composure remained intact, though her knuckles gleamed white. And Emile, always Emile, absent in body, yet present in every whisper. Inspector Gruber tapped the fragment with a gloved finger. If the Countess intended to expose Emile's dealings, she should have chosen her hour more carefully. Still, this confirms motive. Money, rights, business rivalry, a quarrel that escalates. Poirot shook his head gently. No, mon cher inspecteur. Money, it is too simple. You look only with the eyes of the police, but human nature, that is the true battlefield. Look closer. The Countess threatened to speak before midnight. That is the detail that burns. It means she gave her enemy a deadline, and when the clock strikes, it is too late. Tell me, who here would fear the sound of midnight more than any other? A restless movement rippled through the crowd. The Baron shifted his stance as though to relieve a sudden stiffness in his legs. Petrov polished his cufflinks with unnecessary care. Ada simply stared back at Poirot, daring him with silence. Gruber ordered another round of individual questioning, but Poirot raised a hand. Permit me, Inspector, to conduct a small experiment. It will cost us only minutes, yet may save us hours. His eyes twinkled faintly despite the grimness of the moment. I ask each guest here to tell me, aloud, where precisely they stood when the Countess was last seen alive upon the landing. Do not consult with one another. Do not rehearse. Say it quickly, as memory demands. The inspector agreed grudgingly, and so the test began. One by one the guests spoke, pointing to corners of the room or positions along the staircase. Most accounts were consistent, overlapping in detail. Yet Poirot's gaze sharpened when Petrov declared he had been near the side terrace just before midnight, while Calista insisted she had glimpsed him at the foot of the stairs. "You are certain?" Poirot asked her gently. Her fan quivered. Yes. He stood by the stairs, looking upward. I thought at the time he waited for Helena. Petrov smiled thinly, his teeth bared like those of a wolf. The Countess is mistaken. The noise of the waltz, the confusion, she imagines. I was not near the stairs. Poirot's moustaches twitched. An imagination that places you in precisely the spot where the ballerina saw a man descend quickly from the landing. Imagination, perhaps, but a most inconvenient one. The tension grew palpable. Petrov's jaw clenched, but his voice remained smooth. If suspicion is all you require, then hang me now. But I assure you, I did not kill Helena Markova. Poirot's gaze softened, as though he addressed a child. No, monsieur, I do not think it is so simple. If you are guilty, you play your role with elegance. If you are innocent, then someone arranges the scene with you in mind. Either way, you are the figure in shadow. Before further words could be exchanged, the door burst open and a constable hurried in. "Inspector, we searched the servants' quarters. In a laundry basket we found this." He held up a pair of gloves, white silk now smeared faintly with powder, and, upon closer inspection, a thread of crimson no longer fresh. The gasp that followed shook the hall. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes glittering. The gloves. Ah, but of course, a lady's gloves and marked with blood. And the powder, yes, it matches the smear upon the banister. Now we know whose hand restrained the Countess in her final breath. The inspector demanded at once, "To whom do they belong?" The constable hesitated, then replied, "They were found with the belongings of Countess Calista." A cry escaped her lips before she could contain it. "No, they are not mine. I swear it. Someone has planted them." Her fan clattered to the floor. She extended trembling hands. These hands never touched her. I adored Helena, even envied her perhaps, but never would I kill her. Poirot studied her carefully. "It is true, Countess, that gloves can be stolen, exchanged, or concealed. But they tell us something nonetheless. If they were placed to incriminate you, then the hand that killed Helena is also the hand of a dramatist, one who writes scenes as though upon a stage. It is a cunning move, too cunning perhaps." The guests erupted into frantic speculation, voices clashing in a storm of accusation and defense. Gruber barked for silence, his patience strained. "We will examine these gloves in due time. Until then, Countess, you will remain under guard." She sobbed, collapsing into a chair, the picture of despair. Yet even in her distress, Poirot's eyes remained thoughtful, not convinced by appearances alone. "Inspector," he said softly, "the truth draws nearer, but take care. A false trail is a dangerous thing. Already we see the hand that seeks to divert us, and when the hand of the murderer is also the hand of the playwright, one must listen not only to the words spoken, but also to the silence between them." The orchestra instruments gleamed abandoned in the corner. The chandeliers continued to blaze, but the ball had transformed entirely. It was no longer music that guided the night. It was Poirot's measured steps, Inspector Gruber's stern commands, and the mounting sense that every passing moment drew the net tighter. Somewhere among them, the killer stood, hidden behind layers of deceit and careful masks. And Poirot, patient as ever, was already tugging at the final threads. The Countess Calista sat crumpled in her chair, her cheeks damp with tears, while the incriminating gloves lay upon the inspector's table like silent accusers. The guests had drawn back into uneasy clusters, whispering behind trembling hands, their eyes darting toward her, and then away again as though the very act of looking too long might taint them with suspicion. Inspector Gruber's voice cut through the murmur like a blade, commanding silence, his every movement deliberate, meant to impose order upon chaos. Yet Poirot, who stood slightly apart, remained calm, his gaze traveling between the Countess, the gloves, and the anxious faces that surrounded her. "Gloves, yes," he said at last, his voice quiet, but carrying with perfect clarity. "But gloves can walk, they can travel, they can be borrowed or stolen. We must not jump too quickly to condemn, mes amis. Consider, the murderer is clever, but perhaps too clever. He leaves us the blood, the powder, the proof. Ah, but proof that is too neat, too ready to hand. One must ask, why would the killer place such evidence unless he wished us to see it? And who benefits most if suspicion falls upon the Countess?" Calista raised her tear-streaked face, clutching at the words like a lifeline. Yes, that is what I said. They planted it. Someone hates me. Someone wishes me ruined." Poirot inclined his head gently, though his eyes did not soften. "Perhaps so, madame. Yet we must also ask, why you? Why choose you of all this company as the scapegoat? Is it because you are dramatic, emotional, easy to imagine in a fit of passion? Or is it because you know a truth that others fear you will speak?" The fan she had dropped still lay upon the marble floor. She bent to retrieve it, her hands trembling. "I know nothing but what I already said." Helena was restless. She spoke of exposing something. She was too bold, always too bold. I admired her, yes, and envied her, but I had no wish for her death. Inspector Gruber's tone was curt. "Whether you wished it or not, you will remain under guard until we unravel this. It is procedure." Poirot made a small sound of disapproval, but he did not argue. Instead, his eyes slid toward Ada Hartmann, who stood rigid, her expression unreadable, her clutch still clutched like armor. She had not spoken since the gloves were revealed, but the stillness of her silence spoke louder than any protest. Poirot stepped toward her, bowing with his usual courtesy. "Madame Hartmann," he said softly, "you are most composed. But this composure, it is like porcelain. It hides cracks beneath the glaze. The letter named your husband. It promised betrayal revealed. Tell me, are you not the one with the greatest interest in silencing Helena?" Her lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm not a woman to be threatened by gossip. Helena enjoyed theatrics. If she had spoken, the crowd would have laughed at her and dismissed it as another of her jealous rages. I do not fear her words." "But perhaps," Poirot murmured, "you feared that your husband might. Men of business, they are not fond of scandal. If Emile were persuaded that his honor or his dealings were endangered, what then? Would it not shake your foundation? Would it not imperil everything?" Ada's eyes glinted like steel. "You forget, Monsieur Poirot, that my husband is absent. If Helena's murder was meant to protect him, then why is he not here to defend himself? Unless you imagine I killed her on his behalf, in which case you accuse me directly." "Do you?" Poirot studied her in silence for a moment, then gave a small shrug. "I accuse no one. Yet. I only observe. And I observe that you are very careful to shield Emile, though he is not here. It is curious." The inspector moved to break the mounting tension, ordering the constables to continue their search for additional fragments of the letter. Meanwhile, Poirot turned his attention once more to the staircase. He examined the banister where the powder had been smeared, bending close as if the very marble might whisper to him. His eyes caught something new, tiny scratches upon the stone, faint but deliberate, as though a sharp edge had grazed it. He straightened with a sudden gleam of satisfaction. "Inspector," he said quietly, "see here. The dagger, it was not drawn at the moment of the strike. It was prepared earlier. Someone tested its edge against the marble, perhaps without realizing they left a trace. This was not a crime of sudden passion. It was planned, rehearsed, like a scene in the theater." Gruber frowned deeply. "Planned, yes. Which means motive was certain. Whoever did this knew exactly why they killed her." The revelation deepened the dread in the room. Petrov shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his cufflinks. "So you claim a rehearsal? Then it must have been someone with access before the ball began. The Baron, perhaps? He is host, yes? Or Madame Hartmann, who arrived early. Even servants, anyone might have placed a weapon here, waiting for the chance." Poirot smiled faintly. "Very true, monsieur. And you? Did you not arrive early as well? Diplomats, they are always punctual." Petrov's eyes flashed, but he did not answer. The silence was louder than denial. As the constables returned empty-handed from their second search, Poirot folded his arms, his expression thoughtful. "The letter, it is fragmented. But the truth, it remains whole. Someone feared betrayal. Betrayal connected to Emile Hartmann. The Countess threatened to speak before midnight. She was restrained, silenced, and left with a dagger chosen for its flourish as much as its function. Gloves appeared too neat, too convenient to place suspicion elsewhere. This is not the work of impulse, mes amis. It is choreography." He looked around the hall, his gaze moving from one anxious face to another. The murderer dances still among us. He, or she, believes the steps are perfect, the performance flawless, but it is always in the final flourish, the little detail overlooked, that the illusion collapses. And I promise you, soon, very soon, that moment will come. The chandeliers blazed down mercilessly upon them all. No one dared move, no one dared speak, for each suspected that Poirot's sharp eyes had already found the loose thread, and that the unraveling of their carefully woven lies had already begun. The silence after Poirot's words clung to the room like frost. The guests scarcely breathed, their eyes darting from one another as if each feared recognition in the detective's careful phrasing. Inspector Gruber ordered the constables to keep their stations at the doors and stairwells, ensuring that no one could slip away. The Countess Calista sat rigid, her hands trembling in her lap, her fan forgotten. Ada Hartmann's composure had become a mask of porcelain, smooth and unyielding, though the faint pulse at her throat betrayed unease. Petrov paced slowly near the marble column, his polished shoes clicking against the floor in a rhythm that grated against the heavy hush. Poirot moved again with his small, deliberate steps, pausing at the base of the staircase where Helena Markova had fallen. He lowered his voice, though everyone could still hear him. We must picture the moment, mes amis. The Countess stands upon the landing, perhaps waiting for her messenger to return, perhaps preparing to descend. She is restless. She fears her time runs out. Someone approaches her, someone she knows well enough not to cry out in alarm. There is a brief struggle, her arm against the rail, the smear of powder upon the marble. Then the blade is driven home. Not the clumsy thrust of panic, but the precise strike of someone who has imagined this moment carefully. She falls, and the ball is transformed into a theater of death. His eyes moved over the gathering. Now let us ask, who among you was close enough to reach her in that instant? Who had both opportunity and motive? The letter spoke of Emile Hartmann, yet Emile is not here. So, who protects him? Who fears him, or perhaps who wishes to ruin him through the silence of his accuser? The Baron cleared his throat, his voice unsteady, though he tried to mask it with dignity. Monsieur Poirot, speculation is dangerous. You speak of theatre, but this is no play. Helena Markova is dead. We must trust the Polizei, not riddles. Poirot inclined his head with courtesy. Ah, Baron, but life is always theatre. One must observe the actors to learn the truth of the play. Tell me, where were you precisely at the stroke of midnight? The Baron hesitated. I was engaged in conversation near the musicians. Many saw me there. Indeed, Poirot said softly. But the musicians, they look at their notes, not at their neighbors. It is convenient to stand where the gaze of others is distracted. Before the Baron could reply, Ada spoke with sudden sharpness. This is madness. You toy with reputations while the murderer walks free. My husband's name is dragged through whispers, yet he is not even present to defend himself. Poirot turned toward her, his gaze steady. And yet, madame, you defend him most passionately. Too passionately, perhaps. You speak as though you know what the letter contained, though you insist you never saw it. How can this be? Ada's lips parted, then closed again, the mask slipping for just a heartbeat, before it returned. Because I know Helena, I know her malice. If she had a weapon, it would be slander. Nothing more. Or betrayal, Poirot said gently. The fragment names betrayal, and betrayal, it is rarely about mere money. It is about trust broken, a partner deceived, a friend turned enemy. It is always personal, madame. The words hung heavy in the air. Petrov stopped pacing and folded his arms. If you are determined to accuse every one of us in turn, Poirot, then why not accuse me directly? Everyone already whispers my name. Poirot's mustaches twitched as he regarded him. Patience, monsieur. Accusation, it is the final step, never the first. But since you invite me, very well, you had opportunity. You were seen near the landing. You are broad of shoulder, as the ballerina observed. You carry jeweled cufflinks that catch the light, just as she glimpsed. You had reason to seek influence over Helena's fortune, yes? Yet, Poirot's voice softened. I do not think it was you who held her arm against the rail. Your manner, it is too flamboyant for such a neat deception. No, someone else uses your presence as a cloak. A murmur swelled among the guests, half relief, half renewed suspicion. Gruber raised his hand for silence, his face tightening. Then who, Monsieur Poirot? If not Petrov, if not Calista, if not the absent Emile, who? Poirot's gaze swept the room once more, pausing now upon the young ballerina who sat quietly, almost forgotten. She flinched when his eyes met hers. He walked toward her, his step light, his tone gentle. Mademoiselle, you have been brave. You saw more than you realize. Think again. When you returned and saw the figure descending, what did you notice first? Was it the height, the shoulders, or something smaller, something the eyes recall though the mind does not yet name? Her lips trembled. There was a scent, not of tobacco, of perfume, stronger than Helena's, something sharp, like jasmine but darker. The guests stirred again. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming. Ah, that, mes amis, is the detail overlooked. A man may carry jewels, yes, but the scent of perfume, it clings most often to a woman. A woman who approached Helena closely, intimately, as only another lady might. A woman who feared the stroke of midnight more than any man in this room. All eyes turned instinctively toward Ada Hartmann, though she did not move. Her face remained a mask, but the silence surrounding her grew unbearable. Poirot let it linger, savoring the moment, then spoke softly. Yes, the glove may be planted, the letter fragment torn, the suspicion cast upon others, but the scent, it cannot be disguised. It betrays the hand that struck, just as surely as betrayal itself was the motive. Inspector Gruber straightened, his expression grim. Are you saying... Poirot lifted a hand. No, Inspector. I'm not finished. We are close. Very close. The net tightens, but the truth must be revealed with care, step by step. Soon I will gather you all, and then, then, the curtain will rise on the final act. The guests exchanged frightened glances, the weight of impending revelation pressing upon them. The chandeliers seemed colder now, their brilliance merciless, as though they alone knew which of the glittering company had wrapped death in perfume and silence. And Poirot, calm as ever, waited for the last pieces to fall into place. The silence after Poirot's pronouncement was thick enough to choke. No one dared shift or whisper. Even the orchestra, who had long abandoned their instruments, seemed petrified by the Belgian's calm certainty. Ada Hartmann stood utterly still, her face a mask of perfect composure, though beneath it her eyes burned with a watchfulness that betrayed tension. Countess Calista wept softly into her hands, half in relief that suspicion had tilted away from her, half in terror that it might yet return. Petrov's jaw tightened, the diplomat's veneer straining as his dark eyes darted between Poirot and Ada, as though measuring how quickly the tide might turn against him. Poirot did not immediately press his advantage. He let the silence work upon them, stretching out the moment until the weight of it pressed against every guest's chest. Then, with his usual delicacy, he adjusted the cuff of his immaculate sleeve and spoke. Perfume. It lingers like a ghost. It betrays proximity, intimacy. It tells us that in Helena's final moment, it was not the hand of a stranger, not the blade of some faceless intruder, but someone she allowed near without fear. Ada's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her voice remained cold. Monsieur Poirot, surely you do not mean me. Many women here wear perfume. Many could have approached Helena. Just so, Poirot agreed, inclining his head. But yours, madame, it is distinctive. I noticed it the moment you entered the ballroom. Not sweet, not light. It is bold, exotic, commanding, a perfume worn by a woman who does not yield. When the ballerina spoke of jasmine yet darker, I knew at once. The Baron attempted to interject, his voice trembling with a nervous cough. This is conjecture. Perfume is hardly proof of murder. Proof. Poirot's moustaches twitched with amusement. No, Baron, not yet. But it is the thread, and I pull at it. He looked back to Ada, whose stillness was unnerving in its precision. Consider, madame. The letter spoke of betrayal, and it named Emile. You feared Helena would expose a truth, perhaps a truth that would ruin not merely your husband, but you as well. You had motive, opportunity, and the determination to silence her before she spoke. And so, when the stroke of midnight approached, you acted. At this, murmurs rose again, the guests unable to restrain themselves. Ada stood taller, her chin lifting defiantly. If you believe I killed Helena, then say so plainly. But know this, Poirot, I am not a woman who trembles at accusation. You will need more than a scrap of paper and a whiff of perfume. Inspector Gruber's voice thundered above the whispers. Enough riddles, Poirot. If you have the proof, state it. If not, let me conduct my questioning without this theatre. Poirot inclined his head graciously. Patience, Inspector. The truth is a flower. One must not tear the petals too soon, or one destroys the bloom. Allow me but a little more. He stepped toward the staircase once again, his sharp eyes scanning the marble as though each vein in the stone might yield a secret. Then he stooped suddenly, plucking something small and glimmering from a groove near the base. Straightening, he held it aloft between thumb and forefinger. The guests leaned forward, gasping as the light caught it. A clasp, Poirot announced, from a bracelet torn away in the struggle. And see, the design, it is distinctive. Gold filigree with the motif of a swan. It belongs to none other than Madame Hartmann. All eyes flew to Ada, whose hand instinctively tightened upon her clutch. For the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. Her voice, though still steady, carried a faint edge. It proves nothing. Jewelry breaks. Perhaps Helena herself owned such a piece. Poirot smiled gently, almost sympathetically. Alas, no. I observed your bracelet when you entered. 3 swans, joined by golden links. Now there are only 2. One has flown, and here it lies where Helena's life ended. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Ada's hand moved unconsciously to her wrist, where indeed the bracelet now bore an absence. Her silence spoke louder than denial. Inspector Gruber seized the clasp from Poirot, his eyes flashing. This at least is tangible. Madame Hartmann, you will explain how this came to be torn free upon the very steps where Helena Markova was killed. Ada's mask cracked further, though her voice remained sharp. You think I will confess because a trinket broke? No. I was near Helena earlier. She admired the bracelet, touched it perhaps. It could have fallen then. You twist every circumstance into accusation. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. Non, madame. It did not fall. It was torn as she struggled against the rail. You were close, close enough for your perfume to cling, close enough for her hand to grasp and tear. That is why the smear of powder lies high upon the marble. That is why the dagger's strike was so precise, and that is why the letter is torn. You feared she would speak of betrayal, and so you silenced her. The guests gasped as one, some shrinking back from Ada as though guilt itself were contagious. Countess Calista sobbed louder, whispering prayers. Petrov muttered something in Russian under his breath, shaking his head. Ada stood motionless, her eyes fixed on Poirot. For a long moment it seemed she might speak, might deny, might scream. Instead, she only laughed once, a short, sharp sound that cut the air. You weave your threads cleverly, Poirot. But clever threads do not make a noose. If you believe you have unmasked me, then gather us all, as you so like to do, and let the world hear your revelation. Until then, I remain what I have always been, the wronged wife of Emile Hartmann." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. "Ah, madame, you anticipate me. Yes, soon I shall gather you all, and when I do, there will be no refuge in denial, no safety in silence. The theatre is nearly at its final act, and the curtain will rise on truth. Prepare yourself for the little grey cells. They never lie." Inspector Gruber barked for Ada to be placed under watch, though she did not resist. She moved with regal calm, as though she still commanded the room even under suspicion. The other guests watched with wide, fearful eyes, each realizing that the end drew near and that Poirot's patient dance of deductions was about to deliver its final, devastating step. The guests gathered in the great ballroom once more, summoned by Poirot's quiet but unmistakable authority. The chandeliers still burned with merciless brilliance, casting light upon faces weary from hours of suspicion. Ada Hartmann stood under guard, her composure unbroken, though her eyes betrayed a glint of calculation. Countess Calista, pale and shaken, clutched her fan as though it were a weapon of protection. Petrov leaned against a column, his diplomat's mask slipping now into barely disguised tension. The Baron looked drawn, his dignity eroded by fear of what was to come. Poirot took his place at the foot of the staircase, the very spot where Helena Markova had fallen. His small frame was dwarfed by the grandeur of the hall, yet his presence dominated it entirely. With the elegance of a conductor preparing his orchestra, he raised his hand for silence. "Mesdames et messieurs, the time has come. For hours you have lived in the theatre of suspicion. Each of you has played your part, whether with guilt, with fear, or with silence. But at last, the performance nears its end. You wish to know who killed Helena Markova and why. And so, allow me to arrange the story in order, as neatly as the chairs in a salon." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Helena Markova received a letter. It spoke of betrayal, of Emile Hartmann, of a truth that must be revealed before midnight. She grew restless, desperate, for she knew the hour approached when she would be forced to speak or remain forever silent. That letter was seen by others, passed from hand to hand, and at last it vanished into the shadows. But it left traces, fragments, whispers, and above all, fear. Poirot's sharp gaze moved deliberately to each guest in turn. Who feared most? Petrov, perhaps, for his ambitions required Helena's fortune. Countess Calista, for she envied her rival and might have lashed out. Even the Baron, who as host had opportunity beyond all. But envy and ambition, they are weak motives when weighed against betrayal. Only one person faced the ruin of her very foundation if Helena spoke. Ada Hartmann. Ada's chin lifted, her voice rang clear, proud. "I deny it still." Poirot inclined his head politely. "But of course. And yet the clues. They betray you. The perfume. Sharp, exotic, unlike any other here. The ballerina smelled it upon the stair, the smear of powder high upon the banister, left by your gloved hand as you restrained Helena. The gloves themselves, planted to incriminate another, but too conveniently found. And finally, the clasp of your bracelet, torn away in the struggle. Each detail alone, perhaps explainable. Together, they weave a tapestry of truth." Gasps echoed through the hall. Calista sobbed openly, while Petrov muttered darkly. The Baron closed his eyes, as though weary of life's cruel plays. Ada stood motionless, her mask of composure finally cracking. Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but relentless. "Helena threatened to reveal Emile's betrayal. Perhaps he deceived you in business, perhaps in matters of the heart. But you, madame, you feared the disgrace more than any. To protect your name, your marriage, your standing, you struck. You silenced her before the stroke of midnight could free her tongue. You chose a weapon ornamental, dramatic, because you wished to make her death appear as theatre. Yet it is precisely theatre that betrays you. For murder is not theatre, madame, and in your performance you left the smallest details imperfect. And in the smallest details, Hercule Poirot always finds the truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, Ada's shoulders sagged. The mask fell away, and for the first time her eyes revealed the turmoil beneath. "She would have destroyed everything," she whispered. "My husband's empire, our future, my very name. She had the power, and she delighted in it. I could not allow it. So yes, I killed her. Better one life lost than everything undone." A collective shudder passed through the guests. Gruber barked an order, and the constables moved to take her into custody. She did not resist. Her head remained high, though her eyes burned with something between defiance and despair. Poirot watched her led away, then turned back to the company with quiet dignity. "There, mes amis, the curtain falls. Justice, she is not always kind, but she is precise. Helena Markova lies dead. Ada Hartmann faces her fate, and the truth stands revealed. Remember this. Murder, it is born not of hatred alone, but of fear, of pride, of the desperate wish to preserve order at any cost. Yet always it leaves disorder behind. That is the irony of crime." He adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his mustache, and allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "And now, Inspector Gruber, I leave Vienna in your capable hands. Hercule Poirot has done his part." With that, he bowed to the company, his composure impeccable, his little gray cells once again triumphant